This is the Your Career Story podcast, and you're listening to episode 69. If you're a career woman and single, you need to listen to this. Welcome to Your Career Story podcast, a show that's designed for rockstar professionals looking for that extra booster shot of confidence in their careers. Whether you're trying to get clarity on a job transition, want some work-life balance inspiration, or need a strategy to snag that promotion or raise, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Jenna Viviano, ex-Wall Streeter turned startup junkie who now coaches hundreds of clients, empowering them to take back control of the job search and land their dream job. So sit back, grab a glass of wine, and prepare yourself for your weekly boost of career confidence. Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Your Career Story podcast. I am very excited about today's topic because this not only touches on a professional side of me, but also a personal side of me. And I have an amazing guest here today to come and chat a little bit about singleness and your career. So welcome, Yelena Bosovik. I am so excited to have you here. We got connected via LinkedIn and Instagram, and you're like, I would love to talk about this topic because I feel very deeply the connection between singleness and your career. And so we're going to dive right on in today.
Yay, I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? That typical interview question, right? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Yelena Bosovik, and I'm going to be 29 in a month. So I'm getting close to 30, which is a little terrifying, but
30 is fun. I'm going to tell you,
it.
29 was such a boring age to turn. But when I turned 30, there's like people have parties for you. You're 30, you get through your 20s and you're like, my 20s, I mean, I'm only a year older than you, so it's not like I know all things, but I just felt like it was such a great, I did not fear 30. I feared 25 more than I feared 30, which is weird. So
that's fair. They say 30's the new 20 and like 30s are your best years.
Well, you figure out all your stuff hopefully in your 20s. Hopefully you've done a lot of inner work in your 20s and you can start to like process through some things. And 30s, you get to reap the benefits of what you process. So anyways, keep going.
Looking forward to that. I am a tax lawyer and I work for a accounting firm. It's a regional firm. I work in their national office. So it's a lot of in-house kind of internal support for our firm and our clients and our employees. I started my career at PwC, which is one of the big four accounting firms. I did international tax consulting for 3 years while I was there, and I loved it. It was just no work-life balance, even though I think they try to promote work-life balance. But anyway, wanted to make a change about a year ago, so I joined a smaller firm. I am the oldest of 10, and I have an older half-brother. And
That's so fun. I feel like holidays have to be so fun.
I love my family. I do. It's just the next 6 siblings after me are married or engaged and are starting families. So
that can be a little hard.
Yeah, it's been an adjustment. And we had like back-to-back weddings last year during the summer and the fall. And then we have like 4 weddings coming up this year. So it happened really fast, that change where everyone kind of got married all at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I am actually from a Slavic immigrant community. So my family immigrated to the U.S. when I was 8 years old as religious refugees. And so I still kind of grew up in a Slavic community, even here in the States. We kind of stick together.
Where did you grow up?
Portland, Oregon, actually.
Oh, no way. That's so fun.
I moved to Missouri when I was 15.
Okay, so I have some really great friends that live in Oregon, and I knew nothing about Oregon, obviously, until I met them because I'm from the East Coast. And I love Portland. We went to Eugene, actually, is where we spent a lot of our time in that area.
It's gorgeous.
In the summer, it's just so pretty. Anyway, so you lived in Missouri, though, for most of your teen years, it sounds like.
Yeah, so we moved when I was 15. Was not happy with my parents because it's very, Springfield's it's a city, but it feels like a small town feel where everyone's known each other for a long time, for generations. So it took some adjustments, but it's home now for me. So and so in my community, I mean, I'll talk about it later on, but we are very conservative. Our religion is very important to us. And so most people end up getting married by the time they're like 22. I think 24, you're like on the shelf and people start freaking out. So I have surpassed those. So turning 25, that's probably why that was scary for me. So I'm kind of an anomaly in my community. Most women don't get an education or work outside the home. And so I've kind of done both. And I became a lawyer, which don't know any other Slavic lawyers in my community, so especially not women. So
what motivated you to do that? I guess I think that's like what made that like you wanted to be. Did you always want to be a lawyer, or did you always want to be a mom and wife?
I don't know. So I grew up, again, in a very conservative community where education wasn't really promoted or encouraged. But in our home, my parents, they moved us to the US to give us a better life. So they wanted us to be able to get an education and have jobs. Mm-hmm. And they encouraged all of us to go to college because people told them, if you go to college, you make more money and you'll have a more stable job and you'll have benefits. And they're like, yeah, we want this for our kids. And so I was the oldest. They're like, you're going to college. There's like no negotiation and like you'll get married and you get married, but college at the very least is very important.
That's awesome.
And so, yeah, like I was really grateful for that. And I love learning. I'm a type 5 on the Enneagram. So
I love that you use the Enneagram.
I love
now I
learning.
Understand you more. I gotcha. Okay.
Yes. So I'm all about like learning and like I love the challenge of taking on something new. So I went to college, majored in finance and econ, thought I would either get married after graduating as is expected of me, or like go to work for a bank or an office job. And when I was in college, there was a cute guy who was in the pre-law club, and the pre-law club was like 4 people because I went to a really small private school. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to get involved in the pre-law club. I had no idea what lawyers did. I did not want to be a lawyer. Like I did not know any lawyers, but I was like, I can do this. Like you go like once a week, it's free pizza and speakers, and there's 3 of us. So the chances of me seeing the cute guy, very high. And so I joined the pre-law club, and they would do like law school visits, and you had to have at least 3 people for the school to pay for it. And since I couldn't carry either way, if 2 people went, I was like, I'll just go with you. Like I'll be a third. So I started going to these law school site visits, and I learned about what law school was and what lawyers did. And I was like, research, writing, reading, like I love all this stuff, like debating. I was like, hey, like this is like the perfect skill set for me. And so that's when I started looking into law schools, and I went to work for a law firm locally just to get to know some lawyers. And I decided that, like this is a good fit for what I want to do. And when I told my mom, she like panicked. My grandma said like, oh, does that mean you don't want to get married or you don't want to be a mom or have kids? Really? And I was like, how do you equate that with anything? Like, anyway, and so I started praying about it a lot because everyone in my community was really against it. We come from the Soviet Union background and communism, where a lot of people in my community still mistrust the government or lawyers or anyone really in authority. And so they couldn't like wrap their mind around that someone in our community or woman could even become a lawyer. And at that point, I wanted to be a prosecutor. So I wanted to work for the government. And it was just a lot to overcome to get to that. So I really wanted to make sure that it was God's will for my life. So I started praying about it and put a lot of like signs for God, or like not signs maybe, but like things that I would have to go through for me to get into law school. So like
open doors is what I like to call them.
Open doors. Yeah. So, passing the LSAT and getting financial aid and getting into a school. And I really doubted I'd be able to do it because acceptance rates were really low for law school. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I won't be able to do it. Like, I'm not smart enough. Everyone's telling me I can't do it. I shouldn't do it.
That imposter syndrome.
Yes. So I applied to 11 schools, like 11 different law schools all over the country, from all like they're tiered. So like from top tier to low tier. And I was like, if I get into one, God, then like I'll go to law school. And I think within like a month I got into 7, and then I was waitlisted on 3. And then I think I was rejected from 1. And I was like, okay, like 7 schools. I asked for 1, so it kind of felt like an open door. But yeah, so I ended up in law school, and that was probably my favorite season of life. And I grew so much personally, but very much spiritually, just because the nature of law is to retrain how you think and kind of cause you to doubt and be able to justify anything. And so it really made me realize like why I believed what I believed and to stand firm in that. And so, it just kind of became a lawyer.
Yeah.
Way of doing it. But
that's awesome. So would you say like, why do you work? That's one of the questions I love asking people, especially when I was onboarding new clients, which I'm not taking one-on-one clients anymore. When I would onboard them, I would say, okay, why do you work? And they're like, I don't really know the answer to that. So I'm going to ask you that. Why do you work?
I love working. Honestly, I'm the kind of person who doesn't do well with sitting there not doing anything. I know when I have slow seasons at work, I just get really like sad and like honestly just I can't do it. Like I start complaining and looking for work, and my mom always would just not understand it. Like I'd have a slow season work between projects and I'd complain that I don't have any work, and she's like, you're making more money than your dad has ever made in his life a year. And you're getting paid to sit there in an air-conditioned office and not do anything. And you're complaining. And I was like, I can't sit here all day not doing anything. And so, I don't know, I like working. If I'm not working in my spare time, either writing or leading an online ministry or, working in a book, I'm always doing something, whether it's paid work or just work that I enjoy doing. And people think I'm insane because my hobbies are usually considered work for most people. But
I relate to that so much. I feel like it was funny when I launched my business, my roommate at the time, when I launched my business full time, it was a hobby. My business was a hobby because I had a full-time job and I had a side hustle. And so my side hustle was essentially a hobby. She goes, what are you going to do now that what's your side hustle going to be now that your side hustle is your full hustle? I was like, that's a really great question. And I feel like as a single woman at the time, I threw myself into my business because I felt like I needed to prove that my time not being married was worth something. Do you relate to that feeling?
I was just thinking about that because I honestly didn't really want to get married for a long time. Not ever, but because I felt this pressure to get married, and in my community, it was in kind of either or, like you get married or you go to school and get to work and go to work. And it was never like, there's no model of doing both. I know some people who are nurses who were also married, but they either worked part-time or just worked on and off, but to have someone in business or just having a traditional 9-to-5 job, I didn't have that in my community. And so I didn't even think it was possible for a long time. And so when I had that either or kind of siphoning, it made it hard to envision. And if I had to choose, it'd be work for me for a long time because that's what I wanted. And a couple of years ago, I think I was in law school, I started praying about it and started reading my Bible in full every year. And God started really working in my heart and kind of showed me that I couldn't, it's not either or for him. And
that's good. That's a word someone needs to hear.
Right. And for me, that was groundbreaking. And looking back now, it's not that groundbreaking, but for me it was. And
your upbringing as well, that plays into it. I can relate to that.
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of work backwards and kind of work my way into, whatever God's will is for my life. And right now that is working. And I do want to get married. And a couple of years ago, I started praying about that and seeking it more earnestly. And I do feel that way because I worked really hard when I was at PwC for 3 years. I was working 24/7, holidays, vacations, family gatherings. Guys worked all the time. And I was okay with that. And because I loved what I did. And it was in a season where I could do it. I lived away from my family, away from my church. So I didn't really have anything external that took up my time necessarily, my personal life. So my work became my life. And I got burned out. During one busy season, I ended up in the ER they thought I was having a stroke, but ended up being a migraine with stroke-like symptoms. It was just from stress and not sleeping and eating poorly and too much caffeine. Wow. And that was kind of a wake-up point for me. I can't keep going like this, no matter how much I love it. I just that's not healthy, for me or long-term sustainable. And so that's when I kind of started praying about God would open, a whole new opportunity for me that would have more of a work-life balance. And that was terrifying because my work was my identity. I was so wrapped up in it. It's what I did. That's what impressed people. It made it seem like my life was worthwhile in a way.
Yeah.
And so when I made the switch to a smaller firm where my hours are more 8 to 5, it's not a super interesting job when you tell people what I do. I enjoy it, but it's not a glamorous job my job at PwC that has a little more street cred. And moved back home. I'm living with my parents for now while I'm saving up for a house. And it's just my life changed. And I'm also in a season where I'm walking parallel with my siblings and my friends who are starting their families. They're buying houses, getting married, settling down. And I'm starting to feel that urge, I want to settle down too. I want to buy a house. I want to make a community where I am back in my hometown. But it's harder when you're single because it kind of feels like you're settling, but not in a good way. I have all this time. I should maybe keep pushing harder, keep doing more because it is my freer season or my free time in a way. And so you definitely going to have that struggle of, you want to make it seem like you're doing something worthwhile because you're not filling your life with what everyone else is filling their life with. And for whatever reason, it seems like getting married, buying a house, settling down, those are real life events. That's life moving forward. And if you're not doing that, your life must be standing still. So to justify that, you kind of overcompensate maybe with work or traveling or doing something that seems important or somehow counteracts what everyone else is doing.
Everything that you're saying, I'm like, there's so many things I want to unpack there. But I think the one thing that you touched on in the beginning, you said my identity was so much in my work. And that is something for me personally. I mean, my name is my business. My business is talking about careers. Careers was my life, is my life. And so I think even for me who has moved out of a season of singleness into engagement and then soon to be marriage, it has been very difficult for me to shut that off. And I wish I would have spent more time in my single years starting to not slow down is probably not even the right word, but balance appropriately and put proper weight where things need to be weighted. Because I was probably the opposite of you, where I wanted to be married when I was 22. My mother got married when she was like 22, 23 years old, met my dad when she was like in her teen, like 18, I think 18, 19. She's probably gonna tell me all the ages are wrong, but early in her life, she was married. And so in my brain, I love the idea of going to college to get my MRS degree. Like I proudly said that, which is so funny looking back. I would never probably say that now, nor would I encourage that for my daughter. But I think for me, having that familial background, not that my parents ever pushed on me to get married. They just didn't. They didn't do that. But I felt that pressure I put on myself that if I wasn't married, that I better be really stinking good at my job and I better really be rising through the ranks and be somebody because I'm not somebody to somebody else. So the identity piece, how do you start? Do you struggle with that still? Because I feel like I still struggle with that. Even being somebody who's moving out of singleness, I still struggle with that.
Yes, I do. And I think a lot of it comes from, well, I love working and I like doing my job well. And I do want to see that, external recognition of my work, which is, promotions and raises. And to get promotions and raises, you have to put something in. Like if you're just kind of skating through, you may get it, but like not at a timetable that you want, at least for me. So that means you put in maybe a little extra going beyond just what's required. And to do that, like, when I work, I put all of me into when I work. Like, I love what I do. I love doing it. And I put all of myself into it. And there's just this pressure of, you have to put in the hours and the time. And for me, it literally have to like talk to myself and like tell myself that like, it's okay to leave the office at 6. Like, it is okay if you do not get promoted early. Like, it is okay. Like, there's no rush. There's no pressure. There's nothing to prove. And literally have to tell myself that to just like, remember what's important. I don't know if you've heard of Laura Casey. She does the power
I love
sheets.
Laura. I emailed her. Talk about networking, y'all. I emailed her when she came out with the book, Make It Happen. I'm so weird. But I emailed her and I was like, I love your book. And I asked her a very specific question. I need to find that email somewhere, but she sent me this long email to answer my question. Anyway, she's the sweetest. I love it.
Yes. Okay. So when she does her power sheets, she says, look at where you want to be 80 and work your way backwards.
Yeah.
And like, you'll see what's important. And for me, like when I'm 80, like, yes, I want to have a good career behind me and I really want to make it to an executive level at some point. But looking back, like, I don't want that to be my defining legacy. Like, oh, she just worked really well. And so looking back at that means, okay, if work is not going to be my main legacy, there has to be something else. So for me, that's community and ministry. I feel like God's given me a writing talent and I work with a lot of teens and young women. And like, I want to invest in the generation after me. And that means I have to have time or margin in my life to be able to do that. And if I'm working a ton, I don't have time or margin in my schedule or mentally or emotionally or spiritually to be doing that. And so it goes back to like that balance of like, okay, this is important, but this is also important. And just constantly coming back and like checking yourself and just being aware of where you're investing your time, because I feel like time goes by so fast. And just kind of separating that and, kind of again, looking at what's important in the big picture and what I want to invest my time in. I think that really also helps. And also just honestly, I tell myself all the time, like, Yelena, your identity is not in your job. Your worth is not from what you accomplish in your work. And just keep telling myself that over and over and over again when I kind of forget and get on the hamster wheel that is corporate life.
Yeah. And I'm my own boss and I do that. Like, I was feeling guilty yesterday that I didn't get more done. Or
Yep.
I have a sabbatical coming up, and that was kind of I'm ready for it now. I'm like, let's go. I'm ready for some time off. But that was a really hard decision because I'm actually right now really busy. I've got a lot of people reaching out to me. A lot of people want their resume done. I'm really putting a backseat to that because I'm about to get married. And to your comment, like, I don't want my only thing to be that I was really good at writing on LinkedIn. Like, that's awesome. Great. I'm hoping that God uses some of that to really help people and inspire people. And he's going to do what he's going to do with my career. But I cannot only be that person. And I was realizing that when I was starting to plan like what I wanted to do in my sabbatical, because I'm not a person who can just sit still 24/7. Like, I'll probably spend a week at the pool and read some books and that's it. But after that, that's not healthy for me. And I actually don't think it's healthy for most people.
Yeah.
So I was starting to think about some things to plan. And I realized, like, I don't create margin in my life even to do my laundry. Like, it's work, sleep, talk to Brent, talk to some friends, maybe go out for drinks and go to bed. Like, that's not a life. That's unhealth. Mm-hmm. And so there's that piece that has carried over from singleness. And that's really, really hard to break. Really hard to break. And I think for any single woman that's listening to this and you're like, yes, I feel like my worth is totally in my work. And that's why I think we as women can get really frustrated with ourselves if we don't advance or if things don't work out at work, if we are single. I know for me, I took everything so personally because that was all I felt like I was being graded on because I was already failing over in the personal life. Like, nobody was dating me. Nobody was interested. And when I got a bad review at work or something, or I had to improve something, I was a mess. Mm-hmm. Do you relate to that? Does that ever happen to you? Is it just me?
Yes. No, 100%. Yes.
So, how do you deal with being single maybe longer than you probably, at this point, you said you've been really praying into your future, mm-hmm. and that's something I definitely relate to and something that I really did over the past couple of years. So, how has that affected your approach to your career, right? So, you're single longer than you wanted to be. How does that inform decisions now?
Well, I think when looking back a couple of years ago and I was still at PwC starting my career, I just kind of figured that once I get engaged or get married, that'll be the indicator for when I kind of not scale back, but when I have more of a work-life balance. Mm. And that didn't happen for me. Like, I literally got to a point where my body is like, you can't keep going at this pace, and it kind of forced me to stop. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know when my single season is going to end. I don't know if it'll ever end. Like, maybe God has other plans for me. And I had to decide for myself that, I'm going to walk with God in this season and follow his lead without waiting for maybe external situations to change for me to feel like I am where I'm supposed to be. And so it kind of took a reevaluating of my life and, looking at, again, like, what do I want my legacy to be? And honestly, where I want to be when I'm 80, I can get there with or without kids. Like, yes, I want a house filled with kids, but they don't have to be my kids either. Like, I can fill my life with children and experience being a mother. Like, I have nieces and nephews. I work with teens in my church, and I can do those things even as a single woman. And I think for a long time, I kind of, again, did an either or, where I said, when I'm single, my focus is my work and my career. And then when I'm engaged or married, then my focus will be more ministry and family and investing in relationships. And again, it's not an either or. I can focus on my work as a single woman, but it can also grow those relationships and mentoring and teaching and investing in the generation that comes after me. It just maybe doesn't look like what it looks for my friends who are moms and have kids or are married and have husbands. Mm-hmm. And so it's just, again, being proactive and thinking about where you want to be when you're 80, what you want your legacy to be, and realizing that you can probably accomplish most of that right now. And all that being said, being single at 29, especially in my community, is really, really hard. I'll be honest, there was seasons when I went through it where I couldn't pray about it anymore. I was bitter, and that bitterness, and it wasn't even envy necessarily, because I'm really happy for my friends and my siblings whose prayers were answered, because that is God's answered prayer in their lives. And so it wasn't even envy per se, and I wouldn't want to take what's theirs because that's theirs and it's perfect for them. But it does there was a season where I was just really bitter and sad and angry, and it felt like my life came at a standstill, and I just didn't have the motivation or desire to do anything, because I felt okay, I'm ready to be in the next season. Like, I'm done with this one. Like, I don't want all this free time. Like, I don't want all of this that like people are like, oh, this is such a good thing about being single. Like, you don't have the responsibility of a family, and your money is your own and your time is your own. Like, all these benefits, which are great, but you're like, okay, like, I think I'm ready to move on. And God's like, well, I don't think you are. So you kind of have the standstill where, God feels like this is the best thing for me now. And I feel like this is not the best thing for me right now. And it just comes to like, when I pray about it and humble myself, I realize that like, I don't know how much of this I've left this season, but I do want to steward it well, because I don't want to waste it thinking about where, the next season, or wishing I was in the next season, because every time like kind of feel like I have a career crisis right now, in a way where I'm in a job where the role I have was kind of made for me. Like, when they hired me, they kind of told me like, whatever you want to do, we can make room for it, which is amazing to have
amazing
freedom to make my own job.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you have to know what you want to do without someone telling you what your job description is. So I kind of have this freedom of creating my own job description, but then it's like, well, what do I want to do? And so in this pivot, I guess, in my career, I have to kind of, again, prioritize and see what's important to me, what I want to focus on, and make it what I want to make it. But it also just means like being fruitful with what I have, and like being faithful. Like, God gave me something to do right now. Like, I'm finishing my first, hopefully, print Bible study. I've written a few digital Bible studies, but I really want to get one in print, and it'll be on singleness, because I feel like that is what I know best. And that's what I just end up talking about a lot, because it's what I'm living. And so like working on finishing that, I wrote a book manuscript that I haven't touched in 2 years that I need to go back, and feel like God's given me plenty of work to do right now without borrowing from the next season that I'll be in eventually, God willing. And so
that's good.
Again, just going to like being faithful with what you have now, because I think we do have to answer to God for what we did in each season, and saying like, oh God, I spent it wishing I was in a different season, is not really being faithful.
Yeah. It's funny. There's my friend Stephanie Mae Wilson. She has a course called Love Your Single Life. Have you ever taken it?
I have not taken it, but I do follow Stephanie on social media.
She's awesome. She's having 2 babies come on the way, which is super exciting. But
so exciting.
She has said in her course, one of my favorite questions she asks is, if you knew that you only had like 6 years left, or however many time of being single, how would you live it? And I wish I had that question before because I met Brent 2 months later. And it's not that like I was very ready to meet him. It was one of those things that it very clearly was aligned. And it was very clear to me looking back on it that all those years, we should have never met until the exact moment that we actually met. Like we should have never have met any other time than the time that we met. So I can affirm for myself in my life that is 100% true. And I trust God's time. So I'm going to trust God's timing with you. And the other thing that she helped me think through was like, if it is the desire of your heart, and to start thinking through that and praying through that, that was really, really helpful for me. And that you can't like muster it up. Like you don't need to overextend yourself in this season too, in order to make up for what you feel like your life should be looking like. Your life is the way that it's supposed to be. And I had written an Instagram post when I did get engaged, and I was saying like, it is okay to be happy for me and also sad for yourself. Because my friend said that to me when she got engaged, and I was so happy for her. And she said to me, she's like, but really, how are you doing? And I just started crying. Like I just gotten like, a guy was not interested in me. I was just a fifth wheel on a trip. Like, and then she got engaged. It was just like a perfect storm of things. Right. And I said, honestly, I'm really sad for myself. She goes, it's okay to be happy for me and sad for yourself. Like you can be both at the same time. And for me, that was freeing to not feel the guilt and shame of like, I knew I was jealous of her and I needed to work through that. But she also understood and was a gracious enough friend to say, it's okay if you're feeling hurt. I get that. And so when I was writing that Instagram post, I said that like, I know that there are some of you that are reading this, you're just like, are you kidding me? Another girl. It's never going to happen for me. Because I was that girl. I thought that exact same thing, that like, it's never going to happen for me. I'm never going to meet the guy. He doesn't exist. I want a fairy person, like all these different parts of it, right? Like I'm just supposed to be a single woman because I do single really well. Like all of those narratives were in my brain. And there's something that you said that was really interesting, that I did not graduate in God's favor because I have this ring on my finger. Just because I have a ring on my finger does not make me any more valuable than you. who doesn't have a ring on your finger,
Mm-hmm.
except for like literally the monetary value of this.
Yeah.
Like, that's the only way, which Brent will tell you is we got that thing insured, right? So, but it doesn't make me any more valuable or more in God's favor because of that. I think that what you are doing right now, just to give you some encouragement, like what you're doing right now is impactful. What you're doing in the world is not in vain. And what you're doing in the world doesn't make it any less impactful because you're not married. Like, that's just not true. And that's not how God works. And so it's not like you have to like muster up and fix all of your wounds and things until you're ready to be clean and spotless to be married. Like, that's not how God works.
Yes.
And so to just remind you and encourage you that He's not distant in your quest or in your questions or in your desires. Like, He's just not absent to that. So I just want to encourage you in that, because I know that feeling. I know what you're feeling right now.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's hard when you said you have younger siblings right now that are married, and you're the oldest of how many again?
10.
Goodness gracious. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Of So that's got to be hard part of it as well. So how are you dealing with the idea of like, okay, I'm ready for this family. I'm not there yet. Like, do you think about actively dating? Like, how does that, I know I didn't have this question for you, so you're probably like, Jenna.
Well, it's funny you should ask that. So in my community, obviously everyone gets married super young. And I preferably, if I had to choose, I'd like to marry within the Slavic community because of just the culture and the language. So we speak Russian. So my church is Russian speaking. Cool. And we speak Russian at home. And so I would like to marry within my community, but I'm also open to God's leading wherever that leads. And obviously we live in America now, and I probably have more American acquaintances than Russian ones. But in my community, at least, like, there's honestly very little options, like, because everyone's married, and that's how it is. And my religion is very important to me. And so I would like to marry within my religion as well. And that also feel like limits it, because most people I know are from my career or my workplace, and a lot of them are not Christians. And so that's, I feel like, where most people meet people. Yeah. And when I first started praying about this a long time ago, probably 5 or 6 years, and I promised God, or in something I think it's promised to make daily sometimes, because it's a promise of surrender. And I was like, God, I want you to write my love story. Like, I have a choice of who I marry. I really believe that I could choose to marry anyone as long as they're Christian, and God would bless it. I really do believe that we have the free will to do that. But if you study God's will, like the word in the Bible, in the New Testament, especially in Greek, it's thelema. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but that's how it's spelled. Yeah. And it means God's best offer, or like the best choice. And I love that, because it still implies it's a choice. Like, you can choose God's best offer. And like when you're job hunting, right? You can have multiple job offers and you want the best one. You can choose any of them and, have less pay or, better hours, whatever it is, you can choose, or you can choose the best one. And that's the way I view dating and choosing a spouse. Like, I can choose something for myself, and I have had choices, but every time I prayed, God said, this isn't yours. And so I was like, okay, God, look, as much as I like it, I have to trust that your will be done, and your will is the best offer for me. And so that's what I'm waiting on. And I think it's an interesting balance of being passive and still, but also being active and putting yourself out there. And
it's a hard balance.
It's hard balance. It's really especially hard when you don't have a lot of options. So it's like, it's a very hard balance. And so for me, it just means like praying and taking it to God. And I think at the end of the day, it takes refocusing my mind and asking myself if I truly believe that God is who He says He is, and that He can do what He says He can do and will do. And I don't think God ever promised anyone a husband. I think that's something in our Christian communities that is misspoken, that God promised you a husband, or if God gave you the desire for marriage, He will fulfill that desire. And I really believe that although God did create, marriage with the New Testament, everything changed, where it was no longer about carrying on a line to get to Jesus. Jesus came, we all became brothers and sisters in Christ and co-heirs in Christ. And from there on, God said, go and make disciples. And I think marriage is still important, but God
The church definitely seems like it values it more than my single friends.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, totally.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, but that God doesn't like you were saying, like married or single is not like one status is higher than the other, or one is more godly than the other. Mm-hmm. And in our church, we're like, well, God will send you a husband. Like, you can't promise me that, because God didn't promise me that. God promised me himself, and he is going to be enough. And he knows what is best for me. So if I can serve God best married, that season will come. And if not, if this is God's best offer for me, then this is God's best offer for me. And it's again reminding myself that, do I believe God is in control? Like, do I believe that it is God's will for me to be single right now? And if I say no, that means I'm outside of God's will. We'll have to figure out, okay, how am I outside of God's will? Did I reject something along the way? Or like there has to be a reason for that. And so the thing is, like, I've been walking with God for years, like most of my adult life. And, I grew up in a Christian home, but ever since I accepted Christ, and I pray about all my major life decisions, like what school I go to, whether I go to law school, the jobs I take, the dates I've gone on, the proposals I've gotten. Like, I've walked with God, and I've sought God's counsel and all of that. And I know that God has been with me through all of this, which means right now, if I'm walking in God's will, it is God's will for me to be single. And should that change, if God wants that to change, God is able to bring that about. And honestly, he doesn't need my help. He just needs my willing surrender to be walking with him and being obedient where I am in my season. And, if I get there, when I get there, God is able to do that. I think a lot of people, like, there's this pressure to take it into your hands to make it happen, and blame yourself for, your singleness, or doubt if that's what God wants for you, whether he wants marriage. But at the end of the day, do you trust God to be who he says he is, which is a good father and your provider? And do you trust that his will be done and he's in control? And I think we all feel that, like with COVID-19 right now, like, do we trust that God is in control and everything is happening as God's will? And a lot of people, have their conspiracy theories and their own takes on this. But at the end of the day, like, God is in control. And so that applies to me on my personal level too. But,
yeah. That's good. You can preach it, girl. Keep on going. I think that's true. The idea of, when I met Brent, it was very much, I was just doing my life. I'd stopped getting on, for me personally, and I've done a whole other podcast on this about like dating sites and all that kind of stuff. I've done that actually with Stephanie Mae Wilson. I've done some stuff. My friend Mandisa just did a series on like singleness, and I was on talking a little bit about some of that stuff. But so don't beat me up if I say I was done doing the dating scene for a while. I had kind of quit it just because I was exhausted of it. And it was a season where it was really good for me. And then there was a season where it just wasn't good for me anymore. And I met Brent just from doing my life, going through the motions. I was in a faith at work class, and I gave a presentation on the history of my life. My last slide said, I'm now taking applications and resumes for the future Mr. Jenna Viviano. And there was a guy in the class that said, gosh, that guy looks like Brent. Wait, Brent's from Pittsburgh. Jenna's from Pittsburgh. We should get them together. And that's literally how it happened. I was just doing my life. And me and my friend Mandisa did all this YouTube series that she has on her own, her YouTube channel. And she had that question of like, how did you meet your significant other? And like 9 times out of 10, it's people's just like, I was just showing up in my life. I wasn't like making it happen. I was just showing up in my life, and that's how I met my person. So I love this conversation. It's so good. So are you worried then? Like, cause this is something that I think I struggled with a little bit in the beginning when we were trying to figure out the time thing of like spending more time away from work, which is so healthy for me. And my fiance rests really well. But do you ever worry, like when you do get married and start having a family, like how that will affect your career? Because it's all you've known, right? So like, do you ever get worried or concerned about that?
I did, but not as much anymore. And I think that just comes through like getting older and being more established in your career. But that's something I worried about growing up. And for a large reason, again, why, like I said earlier, why I didn't want to get married is because for me, it was an either or. And I felt like I'd have to give up my career because, again, in my community, most women don't work outside the home and the husband is the primary breadwinner. And so I felt like that's the model I had to fit into. And people would say like, oh, you'll be a bad mom if you keep working, or like, what's going to happen when you get married? You have to quit your job. Like, what's the point of going to law school and taking on all this debt if you're just going to sit at home and have babies? Like, I get asked this question all the time, and that logically you're like, that's a dumb question. But then like, the more you get asked it, you're like, do they know something I don't? Yeah. Like they're married. They must know something that I don't. Yeah. And so again, I prayed about it a lot, and, God would take me, like, I did a study on like women who worked in the Bible, and that, just because you're married doesn't mean you have to be idle.
Tell
and
me
just
more
'cause you
about
have
that.
Kids,
I'm actually
right?
very curious. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so we actually have, so I lead an online ministry. It's called Tears of Magazine. And on tearsofmag.com, we actually have a shop. We have free ebooks. And we have one that's called Thy Will Be Done, about figuring out your calling. And we have a couple chapters on women working and what the Bible has to say about that. So a big part of my heart
I bet that's controversial.
Yeah,
I mean, well, it
is.
shouldn't be controversial, but I'm sure like
in conservative communities.
In conservative communities, there's a lot of people that are not from conservative communities that listen to my podcast, but yeah. I can relate. I understand how that might be a little bit like, oh, which I actually didn't realize until I moved to the South, because because like when I lived in Pittsburgh, I went to a Presbyterian church growing up. My parents felt like they really broke away from a lot because they went from a Catholic church to a Presbyterian church, which in retrospect, looking back, it's like, it's kind of almost, it's a lot of liturgy. It's a lot. And then I moved down to the South, and it's very charismatic. There's a lot more. But that's a very common narrative. What you just said is like women and working is a very interesting concept still for people in conservative church environments because of the way they interpret scripture. But go ahead, keep going.
Yeah, no, I'm super passionate about this topic because it took me years of praying and studying the Bible on it, because I really I wanted God to teach me on this, not my religion or culture or my work. And because, you kind of have the conservative side, which says, your primary work is in your home. And that pushes more marriage to be able to have work in the home. Otherwise, if you're not married, like, I'm not really sure what you're doing all day if you're not working. And then you have the other side at work, which is like, women can have it all and you should be working full time, and, you can have a nanny raise your kids, and, kind of like two completely different paths. And for me to reconcile the two was really hard. And I think at the end of the day, it comes to just coming to God with open hands with everything you have. I think Nancy Ray talks about this also in her series, where she does at the goal setting series at the beginning of the year, where she talks about putting everything you do and you have before God and saying hey, God, what am I picking up for this year? And what am I leaving back down? And, there may be years or seasons where God says you're going to leave work on the table and pick up a ministry, or you're going to pick up raising kids for a couple of years, or, you're going to pick up both. And I think you walk before God and you answer to God alone. And when you get married, you have your husband, and, you have that hierarchy within the marriage as well, and you make those decisions together. And so, growing up, again, I didn't have that model, and it's not what I was taught. So for me, it was really hard to reconcile with that. And then I went to college, which is really liberal, and kind of went on the other side, the feminist train, where I was like, I'm never going to get married. I'm not going to give up my independence. No one's going to tell me what to do.
Brett still laughs. He's like, okay, you're just being independent right now.
I mean, it's a fact. You have to adjust that, especially you've been single for so long.
I live somewhere in the middle, though. I live somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, so you're going to have to find the middle. And for me, the way I think about it is, I don't know if you read Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg.
It's been a long time since I've read it. I've had my own opinions
when it first
about
came out.
Yeah, I have my own kind of probably negative opinions about it, but tell me.
Okay, the one thing that I remember from that book is I felt the same way. Was I like to read all sorts of things I agree with and I don't agree with, solely because I like learning. And I think the one thing she made a really good point about is a lot of women lean out early in their career because oh, well, if I have kids someday, I'm going to start thinking about it 5 years ahead of time. And so they lean out and don't take a promotion or don't take a job because well, what if I have kids 5 years from now? That's going to be hard for me. And I went through the same thing. And honestly, I didn't even have to read that book. My mom would tell me the same thing all the time, where I was well, when I was going to law school, I was well, what if I get married or meet someone while I'm in law school? And I was well, you don't get married the same day you meet someone. You have to get to know them. You have to plan a wedding. It's going to take a year or 2 or 3, depending if it's a long distance relationship. It's going to take time. You're not getting married that same day. So you'll finish law school. You'll have time. And if whatever reason you can't, you can drop out. But what if you don't get married? Then you wasted 3 years wondering, well, what if I get married? And then same thing with taking a job or a promotion. You're well, what if I get married? Then I can't handle these hours, or I can't, you kind of take yourself out of the running before you even get to that season. And you have no idea if that season is going to happen, anytime
soon. That's so good.
And so don't take yourself out of the running. You can finish the program if you get married. It doesn't mean you have to drop out of everything. And if you do, that's okay. You'll drop out. There's no, you're not signing anything in blood. Even if you have a contract at work, what most contracts are at will right now, you can leave at any point. And maybe you lose a signing bonus or something, but it's not the end of the world. Marriage is a little more permanent. we still have divorce to say, but like, okay, that's more permanent. But like jobs, school, like promotions, all of those, like you can drop them at any time should they get hard or your season changes or you want to make a change, like it's not.
Or even my women that are like listening to this are like, I've never thought I would ever like stop working when I got married. There probably is something subconscious that culture has put into your brain that when you have kids, you can't have kids and be working in a high powered position. And we're just seeing more and more women. Of course, they're going to have help. Of course, it's two people household sometimes it's not. But I love what you said about don't take yourself out of the running until you're in that season. And then you can decide for yourself, do I need to step back for a season?
And you'll cross that bridge.
You'll cross that bridge. I feel like it's funny for me. I was like actually the opposite where I was like, okay, I'm going to start my business now because I want to have kids hopefully in 5 years because in my brain in like a planning perspective, I was like, if I'm not married, 33, I'm going to start that adoption process. Because I always very strongly felt like, okay, if God doesn't want me to be a wife, I for sure know that I want to be a mom. And I can make that happen. So I have control over that. So I actually started my business early so that I could actually dive in further, knowing that I would have limited time because I put myself on a time limit. And that I would so now we're transitioning in our business where we're not doing one-on-one coaching so that I can do more one-to-many and that we can scale and I don't have to be necessarily on every single call and supporting every single, we're transitioning for that season because now we're in it. Now I'm in that season where the first 4 or 5 years of my business, I wasn't in that season. I'm now in that season. So I can totally attest to what you're saying. That is true. If you do that, it's a lot easier on your brain too, your brain space. So
yeah, I think that's an important consideration. I think you don't lean out, but also you have to kind of think forward. So for me, something I didn't even think about until I worked at PwC is ask the questions about if you're going to an employer you're interviewing about their maternity leave policies, their benefits, and the consideration with, millennials don't stay at jobs that long, but the one thing I really appreciate about PwC is they have a very generous paternity policy where they have 3 months for both. And that's amazing in nowadays world. And it's something I didn't use it while I was there, but when I switched employers, that was a question I asked is what is your maternity leave policy? I'm not planning to have kids anytime soon, but I would like to know what I'm should that come down the road, I want to know, will this work for me then? And if not, I'll consider that when I get there, but it's good to know that going in. And I have been incredibly blessed to work with a lot of women in all sorts of positions of the hierarchy, everywhere from managers to partners out of the Big Four accounting firm. And I have seen them, but also even the male partners and directors I worked with who had kids and, everyone does it differently and how they balance that. I had one manager who had small kids and she would just be offline from 3 to 6 p.m. Every day she was offline and you could not get a hold of her because that was her time with her kids. And you just could not get not client meetings or anything. That was a standard she set and everyone in the office knew it and respected it. But the kids went down at 7 and she would be online from 8 to 11 to midnight working. And that was a schedule she set for herself. She was the first one in the office when she dropped her kids off at 7. She worked till 3, picked them up, had dinner with them, and she was just offline. That was something that she set. And then, I had a male director who was the same way. We could go home and he'd be offline from 6 to 9 because that was his time with his kids and he just wouldn't work during that time. And people are well, there's that guilt of I have to be on, I have to be available. I can't take time off because, because I have kids. So, but there are ways to make both work. But a lot of that, your employer, their priority is the employer. They're not going to be hey, make sure you're taking time off to hang out with your kids. They're going to be make sure you're working and billing. And that's their priority. But you have to be the one who'd be
boundaries are so important. Yeah. They're so. We need to do a whole episode, honestly, on boundaries because that's one of the things that even that you talking about the maternity leave, I've had women that I've coached recently who said, can I even ask that question in an interview? Why not?
Yeah, why not? It's important.
It's important. You need to ask those questions. So that's awesome. I love that you said that. I think that's super, super impactful. And just everything that you're saying right now, I think is very much, it's more of what I'm gathering from a lot of what you're saying and what I would agree with too, is this being intentional. I think that, and that's such a buzzword, I feel in the Christian community. So if you're in the Christian community, I'm sorry, I'm using that word. It's overused, but I think it's true. Intentionality in your career and life, because as we're even talking, life and career go hand in hand. And we maybe not realize it. We think that we compartmentalize it, but we probably don't do it as much as we think that we do. And so for us to show up and like you were talking about, future planning, thinking with what do I want to be at 80 and like work backwards from there. I think that's important. And so many women, like women who just joined my Recruit the Employer program, they said one of the things that they're already learning is like, I was never taught to intentionally think about my career or proactively think about my career. I just like got a degree and then I like went. And I was like, oh, that's a cool opportunity. Maybe I'll take that one versus thinking about your life intentionally. And I feel like that's what you're saying.
Exactly.
Whether you're single or you're married. Awesome. I love this, guys. This is such a fun conversation. We usually don't have them go this long. So this is awesome. I was like, let's keep going. But can you share a little bit about where they can find you? Like if they want to get connected with you, where are the best places to connect with you?
Yeah, so I am really active on Instagram. It's just at Yelena Bosovik. And I post a lot about singleness. That's kind of a lot of what I'm passionate about, what I talk about. Again, I'm living through this. And then I also founded and lead Tears Magazine, and it's at tearsamag.com. And we're also on all the socials, but we publish new articles daily, Monday through Friday.
Wow.
And our mission is just to help young women, and most of our readers, I would say, are like college-aged or new grads, working young women, just addressing the issues women face in the modern world today from a godly scriptural perspective. So all of our articles are founded in scripture, and we just try to point people to Jesus and address a lot of the, again, modern conversations that people are having about, like, we have a whole work series every Wednesday where we talk about Christian women who work, because I feel like Christian women work differently than women of the world. Because again, like we talked about, it's that balance of different priorities from the world and from like the Christian values. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I spend most of my time. It's where most of my writing is published. And yeah, so that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. And friends, we'll have all of that information in the show notes, and we will see you next week. Hey, y'all. Thanks so much for listening to Your Career Story podcast. I would love to get to meet you. And there are a couple of ways that we can connect in between episodes. First and foremost, you know I love my LinkedIn. Second is via Instagram. And third is over on my website. I actually have a special spot just for you full of fun, free resources. So all you have to do is go to www.geneviviano.com/resources. Super simple, for a bunch of freebies that will help you boost your career. Hope to see you next week.